All right, welcome to our first video on our ecology unit, and we're going to be looking at page 4 on your packet. So before we get started, just to show you where to get to the link, you know how to get to my homework page. You can click on the ecology pre-post URL, and it's going to bring you up to this link, which you can see all the standards. We are going to start on page 4 with biosphere, so that will take you to here. Okay, so we are going to look at what a biosphere is and, you know, what are the different types of biospheres that we have. So first, before we talk about that, I want to go over the levels of organization from, earlier in the year we talked about how organelles make up cells, and cells make up tissues, and tissues make up organs, organs make up organ systems, and organ systems make up organisms. Well, in ecology, we start with the organism, and we talk about a group of organisms that are of the same type. We define that as a species. So I want you to write this along with me in your space. Write the word species, and we will be writing something in red later with that word. Species are reproductively isolated, and we're going to write that later, but they cannot mate with any other group of individuals. So when you have a group of the same species that live in the same area, we call that a population. So please write down population. Populations are groups of the same species in a particular area. And so, for example, we have a population of deer that live in our county. That population is specific to our county and is different than maybe a population of the same species of deer that live in another county, in another state, because the environment's different. The traits they need to survive are going to be a little bit different. And so a population is in one area, it's very localized. Okay? Populations in an area are made up of, they are what make up communities. Communities are not self-sufficient. We don't call them an ecosystem yet, but they're just a group of different populations. If you look at the fish tanks in our classroom, they're made up of silverside fish, they're made up of populations of killifish, and they're made up of populations of Asian shore crabs. We would call that a community. We wouldn't call that an ecosystem. Okay, and we'll explain why in a minute. Communities do, however, make up ecosystems. Okay? Ecosystems are self-sufficient. And what I mean by that is they have the proper amount of producers, they have the proper amount of primary consumers, the proper amount of secondary consumers, and so forth in a food web to be sufficient. They've got decomposers that do the recycling. They've got producers producing oxygen, and then they have the organisms producing carbon dioxide. The reason I said that the fish tanks in my classroom are considered a community is because we do the filtering of the toxins. It doesn't get filtered out through organisms. We put the oxygen in through an air pump. We don't have plants or producers that are putting the oxygen into the tank. So a community is not self-sufficient, whereas an ecosystem is. There's many different types of ecosystems. There's water ecosystems, there's land ecosystems, there's just many different types, but we talk about those, and each of an ecosystem is considered different biomes. Okay? And the biomes that we are going to start researching when we get to evolution. You guys are going to pick a biome in evolution. It could be the tundra. It could be the Arctic. Well, that's the tundra. But we'll just write it again. It could be a grassland. And there's a lot more that we'll add to that list. But one thing I do want you to know is that biomes are the most general, and they include many different species, whereas the word species equals just one. So I want you to write underneath species in red that this is very, very specific. And we're going to define those as reproductively isolated. Okay? Whereas biomes are very broad and contain many species. All right, the second part of page 4 is environmental factors. If you have your textbook, open to page 66. You're going to see an amazing diagram that goes over these two words, biotic and abiotic. And so in an ecosystem, there are two things that determine what type of species can live in that environment. And you know, bio is the study of living things. So when we look at a biotic factor, biotic is anything living in the ecosystem. So it's anything living. So it's going to be your producers, it's going to be your consumers, it's going to be your decomposers. These are everything that are living in an ecosystem that control the other organisms that can live there. These are biotic and abiotic factors are things that can control what species live there. So, for example, if you are an animal that needs a tree with leaves to survive, to build your nest, if you're a type of bird that has to build their nest in a maple tree, and a maple tree is not in that ecosystem, you cannot live in that ecosystem. That is a biotic factor that's controlling whether you can be there or not. Abiotic, if you could guess, the prefix a means not. So this is not living. Okay, but it's not just anything not living. Anything that's not living that controls whether a species can live there. So remember, these are factors that control a species survival. Okay, so examples here are going to be oxygen and carbon dioxide levels. It's going to be temperature. It's going to be the amount of light that the ecosystem receives. It's going to be maybe in the ocean. It's going to be maybe the amount of salt, so the salinity of the water. These are all things that if it goes in or out of the range, also add pH to that. You know, certain areas, the pH may change, and it's just too acidic or too basic for certain species to survive. You know, temperature, if you look at all the different ecosystems, a desert versus the Arctic tundra, you would never see a polar bear survive in the desert because temperature is so significantly different. And when you look at the environment, this is what makes up the environment, and this is what's going to drive evolution, and it's going to drive their traits. They need traits to survive, different temperatures, different amounts of light. So those are abiotic factors. So what I would like for you to do right now is to pause the video. I want you to go back to my outline page, and I want you to click on a video on how stuff works. And I want you to just pause, this video, go to the website, watch how stuff works, abiotic factors, and then come back to the video. Okay? Number 3 on page 4 says energy, producers, consumers, and niches. And so we are going to complete that. That's going to be the rest of the video. It's going to be those 4 topics. But first, we're going to talk about what are producers. Okay? In your previous classes, you probably only talked about producers as being plants. But producers are any organism that makes their own food. Okay, and they do this through either the process of photosynthesis or chemosynthesis. We're going to talk about both of those, okay? And so when we look at where are these guys on a food web, they are going to be at the bottom of the food web. And when we talk about food webs and energy pyramids specifically, we are also going to know that they have the highest biomass. So let's just write that now so that we can come back to it when we talk about what this word biomass is. That means that we have the most of them. In any ecosystem, you have to have more producers than you have things that eat the producers. These are going to be the organisms that make our oxygen. They are going to be the organisms that make our carbon dioxide. And so when we look at the difference between photosynthesis and chemosynthesis. Let me just erase these lines that I wish I didn't draw, but that's okay. When we look at these 2 words, I want you to underline just the prefix photo. Photo means with light. Okay? Chemo is with chemicals. And those chemicals can be sulfur, they can be other chemicals, but we'll talk about that in just one second. Photosynthesis is a process that we need to know a little bit more about. And so let's just review what goes in and out. Photosynthesis is a process that takes in CO2, it takes in water, and it's going to make our oxygen. Then remember, it also has to have energy. Remember how we always do energy in red. So it's going to make glucose. And if you remember from respiration, we know that glucose has the energy bonds, right? So, let's remind ourselves, this is where the energy bonds are. But where does that energy come from? Well, it comes from light. So we're going to write light over this arrow, and that's going to remind us that this is photosynthesis. So it has to happen in any area with sun. So on land it can happen, and only in the surface of the waters of the oceans can photosynthesis occur. And that actually leads us to chemosynthesis. So what about the bottom of the ocean where there's absolutely no light? Do they not have autotrophs? And so they do, and it's actually a bacteria, and it occurs in the abyss. Okay? And it's done by bacteria, actually, is the producer of the abyss. And if you turn to page 70 in your book, figure 3.5 does a little bit better. It has a nice visual to show you what the difference between chemosynthesis and photosynthesis. But let's just kind of remind ourselves, this is the process that traps energy from the sun and makes it into chemical energy. So let's actually write that down. I'd prefer that you write it down in your red pen right underneath the box in your notes. I know you have some space. So let's just say that this is the process that converts light energy into chemical energy. Okay, so this is, we're done talking about autotrophs, so now let's talk about the things that eat those autotrophs. And those are heterotrophs, or we're going to call them consumers. They can go by either one of these names, but they must eat food. And so let's just kind of write that up in the corner. They must consume food. Okay, and then I'm going to take my red pen off and go back to my blue. All right, so these are words that you should know already, so we're just going to quickly go through these. You should know that herbivores, are strict to eating plants or eating producers. An omnivore can eat both plants and animals. And carnivores strictly eat only meat. So they're going to eat only animal products and eat other animals. And so there's two types of carnivores. There's ones that are strictly predators, and there's ones that are strictly scavengers. And there's ones that are opportunistic and can be both. But let's just talk about the difference between the two. Scavengers will eat anything they'll eat stuff that's dead. So they're going to eat animals that are dead. So they're kind of like the second consumers. They'll come in, they're not going to kill their prey. They're going to eat kind of the leftovers of a predator's prey. But predators are very specific, and they like to actually kill their own prey. So predators are going to hunt and kill live food. So they prefer to kill their own food. That's how they know if it's healthy or not. If the animal doesn't put up a fight, gets caught easily, could it be sick, could it be weak? Predators are pretty good at justifying that and identifying that. They too don't eat anything that they think is sick as well. So now we have all these things that are eating things. We all produce waste. What is the job of a decomposer? A decomposer is definitely heterotroph because it is eats its own food, does not make its own food, but it's going to eat dead material, and it is going to recycle the nutrients back into the food web. So these guys specifically are going to eat anything dead, whether it's plant, whether it's animal, and when they release their waste, it goes back into the soil or it goes back into the water, and it puts the nutrients back into the ecosystem, and so that the food web, the producers can then go take in those nutrients and use them for photosynthesis. And so they are a recycler. And we're going to draw that out in class when we draw a big picture about what a decomposer is. But there are two examples of decomposers that we're going to talk about. Bacteria in all ecosystems is going to be a major decomposer, whether it's the soil in your yard, whether it's the bacteria that live in the water and the oceans. Bacteria is such an important organism in every ecosystem for its stability. It really, really is. And then the other decomposer is going to be a fungus. Okay, and so your mushrooms are also decomposers. Even though they look like a plant, they're not a plant at all. They're not photosynthetic. They must eat and consume the dead material around them. So we are going to talk more about decomposers when we draw our picture of an energy pyramid in class. Okay, so the last word we're going to go over in this video is the word niche. Page 99 in your textbook goes over that word. You have heard this word before in 7th grade, and this might be definitely something that you can define on your own. Usually you guys define it to me as the job or a role an organism has in their ecosystem. And so, if you're a plant, your job is to be the producer. If you're bacteria, maybe your job is to be the decomposer. These are just, a couple examples of niches. It gets really, really specific. So it could be, if you're a bird, maybe your niche is to only eat the insects on the top of the tree and not the bottom of the tree, because that's another bird's niche. And so there's different things that control a niche. So if you look at number 2, explain the role of resources, physical aspects, and biological aspects of a niche. Okay? Your niche is controlled by when you eat. Okay? Are you a bat that eats insects at night? Are you a bird that eats those same insects during the day? Where do you eat? Do you eat on the top of the tree, in the middle of the tree, the bottom of the tree, the ground? Do you eat plant material on the top of the tree? Do you eat animal material? There's so many different things that can control your niche. Okay, so you're also your own behavior, whether you're up at night, whether you're nocturnal or diurnal, all these different things go into a niche. In the next video for page 5, we're going to talk about competition, and we're going to bring back this definition of niche and understand that 2 organisms cannot share the same niche. The competition is just way too high. And so only one organism can have a particular niche within a habitat. I'm going to be the only bird that eats the insects on the top of the tree. So it's really important to understand that, niches can be, organisms are going to compete for these niches, and that's going to be the next thing that we get into in the next video.